let's look at one of the most famous of the composers from the Baroque period. We really have sort of the three big names, Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi. And in this segment, we're going to look at Vivaldi. So Antonio Vivaldi was an Italian priest. So what's he doing composing music? Well, he was a priest, but most of his job was actually working at basically an orphanage for girls. And so he taught their choir class. He did all the things that had to do with music at this girls' school. So even though he was a priest, most of his job was sort of on the teaching side of things. So that he's in a different kind of world, basically. We call him the Red Priest because he was famous for his red hair. So if you hear people talk about the Red Priest, that's where it comes from. There's actually a really interesting Baroque ensemble that calls themselves Red Priest. So if you have a chance to see them, I recommend that highly. They're very entertaining. Now, he wrote hundreds and hundreds of pieces of music, many of them instrumental. He wrote, I think, something like 400 of the same kind of piece. And some people would say he wrote the same piece 400 times. Now, this is a period of time where composers were always borrowing from themselves. If they wrote something they really liked, then they didn't have a bit of problem taking that same theme and using it somewhere else. It's not plagiarism, it's your own piece. They even borrowed from each other and they really didn't care. It was flattering. So a lot of his pieces do have a similar sort of sound. But remember that he's also working with a fairly limited tonal palette compared to what we're used to hearing. So we can forgive him a little for that. But the piece that he's most famous for is actually a set of pieces called the Four Seasons. Obviously, summer, spring, winter, fall. We've got our four seasons here. So these particular pieces are of the genre that we call Concerto Grosso, or if we're talking about the plural, we would fancily say Concerti Grossi. So what is a Concerto Grosso? In Concerto Grosso, you have a large group, but we are in the Baroque era, so large is relative. We're really only talking about maybe 30 or 40 people in the orchestra. But you have your larger ensemble. And then instead of having a soloist who is the big star, you have a small group of soloists. In this case, it's like a little string quartet that's within the orchestra. We wouldn't call them a string quartet because that's a freestanding ensemble that doesn't even exist in the Baroque period, but so you get the idea. So you would have this larger group, which we call the ripieno, you don't have to remember that, and then the smaller group that plays the more embellished and fancy stuff. This is a period of time where we really have the first of our virtuoso performers, people who are really, really exceptionally talented on their instruments and who can play practically anything that you could do with the instrument. So these pieces were a way to showcase those kinds of talents. So they were popular for performers, and we like to listen to them as well. So we're going to listen to the first movement of the spring set of concerti. So as I said, this is a set of 4. So each one actually has 3 movements. So we have a total of 12 movements. And sometimes you will get to hear the entire set in a performance. A lot of times we just get one season at a time. And right now we're just getting one piece of one season. So we're going to listen to the first movement from the spring concerto. This is an allegro, and it's in rondo form. So as we listen to it, I'm just going to pretty much let it run the first time, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about where the different segments are. But what I'd like you to watch as you listen to this piece is the performers, because you can see that sometimes there are like 3 or 4 people who are the only ones playing, and then everybody plays. That's the concerto part. Concerto means together. Concerted means together. So that's the concerto part. The grosso means big. So that distinguishes it from the later concerto that we will see, which will have a soloist instead of a group. But we have a group, and then we have our little soli group that will be playing. So watch the players, because it's hard to hear this when you listen to a recording, but you can see it very clearly on the video, so that's important. So here's our first movement of the Vivaldi Four Seasons, the spring, and our major soloist here is Isaac Stern, who's one of the world's great violinists. So as I said, this is a really good example of rondo form. We have the dun 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 dun. That little theme, that's our A, and we hear it several times at the beginning, as we normally do in a rondo, so that we can be sure that we know what's happening. So as we listen this time, we'll stop each time that we have a new section of the form, so you can listen for that rondo part. This is the beginning of our B section. This is a section where we have just the soloist playing. We have a lot of ornamentation, which is something very much used in the Baroque period. All those doodly-oo, all those little decorative trills and attachments to the melody, very much Baroque style. Here comes our A section again. It's really obvious when it starts. It's always the whole orchestra coming back in, and you know this theme so well, it's not a problem to find it. In fact, we know it so well now that we're just getting a little truncated version of it. So that was all we're going to get of A this time. Now we're into C. So very different from our twiddly bit that we had for our B section. Here it comes again. That time it's even shorter. He knows we know it now. We don't have to have it over and over again. Very dramatic, different section here. So now we're at letter D. Here's A again. Okay, what do we have here? This is a new section. It's obviously not A anymore, but it doesn't sound completely new. That's because it's a lot like B at the beginning. So you might describe this as a B sort of altered, or we could call it E and just say it's something that it might be different enough to be called something new. And then one more time, A comes back because we need our closure. So this is a fairly long rondo. The piece itself is not that long, but he does incorporate a lot of sections. But by being able to shorten up those A's when they come around the later times, he can do that. So this is an important work because it's a good example of Concerto Grosso for you, but it's also a really kind of advanced work for its time. This is written in the 1700s. He's got a title, Spring. He's given it a name that's descriptive. We won't see that again for almost 150 years. So he's really ahead of his time here. And what he was trying to do with each of these concerti was to give us a sense of that season, what it might sound like. So if you think about this piece and Spring, he's got bird-like sounds, all those little twiddly things sound like birds. He's got a thunderstorm, you get a part. So, thunderstorms are very spring. After the thunderstorm, the birds come back out. So he's actually telling us a story through this rondo, and that's a very advanced thing to be doing in Vivaldi's time. So what we need to remember, that this is a Concerto Grosso, which means that we have a group of soloists, and then we also have some instruments that accompany them. It's important because it's way ahead of its time in terms of its trying to represent something in music, not just music because of the beauty of it. And that is one of many, many, many concerti that Vivaldi wrote.